Growing up, Sarah was always the golden child. While I spent hours building computers in the garage, she was winning debate tournaments and student council elections. Mom would beam whenever Sarah spoke about her leadership potential and her plans to revolutionize the tech industry. "Your sister has vision," Dad would say, watching Sarah present her high school business plan. "She understands what it takes to build something real." Meanwhile, I was dismissed as the computer kid who played with gadgets all day. When I started freelancing web development at 16, earning more than most adults, the family called it pocket money and suggested I focus on real subjects, like Sarah's pre-law track. The dynamic only intensified in college. Sarah attended Harvard Business School while I chose a state school for computer science. Every family gathering became a showcase for Sarah's networking achievements, her internship at Goldman Sachs, her acceptance into exclusive entrepreneurship programs. "Sarah's making connections that matter," Mom would explain to relatives. "She's building relationships with future CEOs and venture capitalists. That's how real business gets done." When I mentioned my software projects or the apps I was developing, the conversation quickly shifted back to Sarah's latest academic honor or business competition win. I learned to stay quiet during these discussions, focusing on my code instead of family recognition. After graduation, Sarah launched her tech startup with great fanfare. The family invested their savings, convinced they were backing the next Silicon Valley success story. Local newspapers covered her launch event. LinkedIn was flooded with congratulations from our extended network. "Sarah's company is going to change everything," Dad proclaimed at that year's Christmas dinner. "She's got the business acumen and the vision to make it work." I had quietly started my own software consultancy, working with Fortune 500 companies to optimize their digital infrastructure. The work was highly technical, extremely profitable, and completely invisible to anyone outside the industry. While Sarah held press conferences, I was solving complex problems for clients who paid premium rates for discretion. My bank account grew steadily, but I drove the same used Honda and lived in a modest apartment. The family assumed I was barely scraping by as a freelance computer guy. When they asked about my work, I'd mention some programming projects and quickly change the subject. Sarah's startup, meanwhile, was burning through capital at an alarming rate. The initial excitement had faded into the harsh reality of market competition, product development challenges, and customer acquisition costs. But the family remained optimistic, convinced that Sarah's Harvard training would eventually pay off. "It's just growing pains," Mom would assure worried relatives. "All successful startups go through this phase." 2 years after Sarah's launch, her company was hemorrhaging money. The initial funding round was nearly exhausted, and potential investors were asking difficult questions about revenue projections and market viability. Sarah needed a major capital injection to survive. That's when I made my move. Through a network of shell companies and investment vehicles, I became Sarah's largest anonymous investor. The $150 million injection came through a prestigious venture capital firm that specialized in tech startups. To Sarah and the family, it looked like validation from the industry's most respected players. I knew Sarah would attract serious investors, Dad celebrated when the funding was announced. "This is exactly what we expected from someone with her background." The investment terms were structured to give me significant control over company decisions while maintaining complete anonymity. Sarah believed she had convinced sophisticated institutional investors to back her vision. In reality, she was being funded by her unsuccessful younger brother who supposedly understood nothing about real business. The irony was perfect. Every board meeting, every strategic decision, every major company direction was ultimately under my control. Sarah would present her plans to investors who she thought were evaluating her business acumen, not knowing that the primary decision-maker was someone she had dismissed as a pretend entrepreneur. Sarah's funding success elevated her status within the family to near-celebrity levels. Every gathering became an opportunity for her to share updates about her revolutionary company and the sophisticated investors who believed in her vision. Sarah's investors include some of the most successful people in Silicon Valley, she would explain to impressed relatives. "They don't just provide capital. They provide strategic guidance from decades of experience building successful companies." The family hung on her every word. Sarah had become their proof that hard work, proper education, and business fundamentals would inevitably lead to success. She represented everything they believed about achievement and recognition. Meanwhile, my actual success remained completely invisible. The consultancy had grown into a multi-million-dollar operation with clients across 3 continents. I had developed proprietary software that Fortune 100 companies licensed for substantial annual fees. My personal net worth had reached levels that would have shocked the family. But I maintained the same modest lifestyle and humble demeanor. When Sarah talked about her company's growth trajectory and investor relationships, I would nod politely and ask thoughtful questions. The family interpreted my questions as curiosity from someone who didn't really understand business, rather than insights from someone who was secretly controlling the entire operation. "It's nice that you're interested in Sarah's success," Mom would say privately. "Maybe you can learn something about real business from watching her work with professional investors." The family gathering that changed everything happened on a rainy Sunday in November. Sarah had been increasingly stressed about company performance, though she maintained an optimistic facade for the family. Recent quarters had shown disappointing results, and the board, meaning me through my representatives, had been asking tough questions about strategic direction. But that night, Sarah was in full presentation mode. She had just returned from a conference where she had been selected as a rising star in tech, and featured in a panel about female entrepreneurs. The family was appropriately impressed and eager to hear details about her growing industry recognition. "The networking opportunities are incredible," Sarah explained, gesturing enthusiastically with her wine glass. "When you're operating at this level, you're connecting with investors, advisors, and entrepreneurs who understand how to build serious companies." She glanced in my direction with what could only be described as pity mixed with condescension. "It's a completely different world from what most people understand about business. You have to think strategically, understand market dynamics, manage investor relationships, build scalable systems. It's not something you can just figure out by playing around with computers." Dad nodded sagely. "That's the difference between real entrepreneurship and hobbies that people call businesses." Mom chimed in. "Sarah learned the fundamentals at Harvard. She understands how to work with serious investors who expect professional-level business operations." I continued eating quietly, occasionally asking questions about specific aspects of her company's performance. The family interpreted my questions as brotherly interest rather than the inquiries of someone who had access to detailed financial reports and board meeting minutes. Then Sarah made the comment that sealed her fate. "The thing about real business," she said, looking directly at me, "is that you can't fake it. You either understand how to work with institutional investors and build scalable operations, or you're just playing pretend entrepreneur with your little online thing." The table erupted in supportive laughter. Even our usually diplomatic aunt joined in the general agreement that Sarah had perfectly captured the difference between serious business and amateur dabbling. "Stop playing pretend entrepreneur," Sarah announced with finality. "Your little online thing isn't real business." Everyone laughed harder. I nodded quietly and replied, "Understood." But inside I was already composing the email that would destroy everything. I spent Sunday night reviewing Sarah's company files. As the controlling investor, I had access to every financial document, every board presentation, every strategic plan. The numbers told a stark story. Despite the infusion of my $150 million, the company was still losing money at an unsustainable rate. Sarah had used the investment to expand rapidly without addressing fundamental business model problems. Revenue per customer remained low, customer acquisition costs were climbing, and competitive pressures were intensifying. The company needed another major funding round within 6 months, or it would face serious cash flow problems. More importantly, the board had been growing increasingly concerned about Sarah's strategic decision-making. Several key hires had been disasters, product development timelines were consistently missed, and partnership deals had fallen through due to unrealistic expectations. The investors, meaning me, had been patient, but patience was running thin. Monday morning, I sent a carefully worded email to the managing partner at the venture capital firm that served as my front for the investment. After careful consideration of recent performance data and strategic concerns raised in our last board meeting, I wrote, "I believe it's time to reconsider our position in this investment. Please initiate the process for a complete withdrawal of our $150 million stake. I want all funds transferred back to our primary accounts by the end of the week." The email was professional, businesslike, and devastating. Withdrawing $150 million from a startup would not just damage the company, it would effectively kill it. No other investor would step in to replace that level of funding, especially after such a dramatic vote of no confidence from the lead investor. Within hours, the venture capital firm had contacted Sarah to schedule an emergency board meeting. Sarah called me Tuesday morning, and her voice had lost all its usual confidence. "Something weird is happening with the investors," she said. "They want to meet tomorrow and they're talking about strategic repositioning and capital reallocation. I don't understand what's going on." I expressed appropriate concern. "That sounds stressful. Do you think it's related to the quarterly numbers?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. "The performance hasn't been perfect, but we're building for long-term growth. Real investors should understand that tech companies go through difficult phases before they scale." Wednesday's board meeting was brutal. The venture capital representatives, acting on my instructions, presented a comprehensive analysis of the company's problems. Revenue projections were unrealistic, cost management was poor, strategic execution was consistently falling short of expectations. "We've been patient," the lead partner explained, "but our analysis indicates fundamental problems with the business model and execution strategy. We don't believe additional capital investment would be productive at this time." Sarah fought back with presentations about market opportunity, competitive advantages, and long-term vision. But the numbers were undeniable. The company was burning through cash without generating sustainable growth. "We've decided to withdraw our investment," the partner announced. "Effective immediately, we'll be liquidating our position and reallocating capital to more promising opportunities." Sarah was stunned. "You can't just withdraw $150 million overnight. The company will collapse without that funding." "We understand the implications," the partner replied coolly. "But our responsibility is to our own investors, and we can't justify continued support for operations that aren't meeting performance expectations." By Thursday, word had spread through the family that Sarah's company was facing a crisis. The sophisticated investors had suddenly pulled their support, leaving the startup in desperate need of emergency funding. Mom called a family meeting for Friday evening. "We need to figure out how to help Sarah through this difficult time," she announced. Sometimes even the best entrepreneurs face setbacks when investors don't understand their vision. The gathering felt like a war council. Sarah sat at the head of the table, looking exhausted but determined. She had spent the week frantically calling potential investors, trying to find someone who would replace the withdrawn funding. "It's just a temporary setback," she insisted. "The investors got spooked by some short-term performance issues, but the fundamental business model is sound. I just need to find investors who understand long-term value creation." Dad nodded supportively. "Sarah's built something real. The right investors will recognize that." I listened quietly as the family discussed potential solutions. Uncle Robert suggested leveraging his business connections. Aunt Linda offered to reach out to her network of wealthy friends. Mom and Dad talked about liquidating their retirement savings to provide bridge funding. The desperation was palpable. Sarah's company had become central to the family's identity and financial planning. Everyone had assumed that her success was inevitable, that her Harvard training and professional approach would naturally lead to massive returns. "What we need," Sarah said, looking around the table, "is someone with real money who understands the tech industry. Someone who can write a check for $50 million or $100 million without blinking." She glanced at me with a mixture of frustration and pity. Unfortunately, this kind of investing requires serious capital and industry expertise. It's not something you can just figure out by playing around with computers. I had planned to let Sarah's company fail quietly. The withdrawn investment would force her to either find new funding, which would be nearly impossible given the circumstances, or shut down operations. It would be a clean, professional lesson in business reality. But her continued condescension changed my mind. "Actually," I said quietly, "I might be able to help." The table fell silent. Everyone turned to look at me with expressions ranging from confusion to polite skepticism. I know you need sophisticated investors," I continued, "but I've actually been following your company pretty closely. I have some thoughts about what might work." Sarah managed a patronizing smile. "That's sweet of you to offer. But this really requires people who understand institutional investing and tech company valuations. It's incredibly complex. I understand, I said. Let me make a call. I pulled out my phone and dialed the direct line for my primary investment advisor at Goldman Sachs. Hi, David, I said when he answered. I need to discuss liquidating some positions to free up capital for a direct investment opportunity. The family was staring at me with growing confusion. Sarah looked like she was watching someone have a mental breakdown. Yes, I'm looking at investing directly in a tech startup, I continued. Something in the $150 million range. Can you walk me through the structure for that kind of direct equity position? David's voice was clear enough for the table to hear his response. Of course, Mr. Johnson. Given your portfolio size, a $150 million direct investment would represent approximately 8% of your current holdings. We can structure that as a straight equity purchase or as convertible preferred shares, depending on your strategic goals. The room went dead silent. Also, I added, I want to discuss my existing position in TechFlow Innovations. I believe I'm currently the majority stakeholder through the Meridian Capital vehicle, correct? That's correct, David confirmed. Your $150 million investment through Meridian gives you controlling interest in TechFlow. You've been the primary decision-maker on all major strategic issues. I looked directly at Sarah, whose face had gone completely white. David, I said, I'd like to schedule a board meeting for Monday. I think it's time for me to take a more direct role in company management. The silence that followed lasted nearly a full minute. Sarah was staring at me like I had just announced that I was actually an alien. Mom and Dad looked like they were trying to process information that didn't fit into any category they understood. Finally, Sarah found her voice. That's not possible. I handed her my phone, which was still connected to David at Goldman Sachs. Would you like to ask him about the investment structure? Sarah took the phone with shaking hands. This is Sarah Mitchell from TechFlow Innovations. Can you confirm what you just said about investment positions? David's response was patient and professional. Mr. Johnson has been TechFlow's primary investor since your series of funding round. His $150 million investment was structured through our Meridian Capital vehicle to maintain anonymity, but he's always held controlling interest in your company. He's been receiving detailed quarterly reports and has final approval authority on all major strategic decisions. Sarah hung up the phone and stared at me with a mixture of shock, confusion, and dawning horror. You're the investor, she whispered. I'm the investor, I confirmed. You've been controlling my company for 2 years. I've been providing capital and strategic oversight, yes. The family was still trying to process what they had just heard. Dad spoke first, so when you asked questions about Sarah's business, I was checking to see if her understanding matched the reports I was receiving from the management team, I explained. Mom was shaking her head slowly. Your little online thing is a software consultancy that generates about $40 million per year in revenue, I said. The startup investment was funded from my personal savings. Sarah's face was cycling through a range of emotions: shock, embarrassment, anger, and something that looked like grief. The realization was hitting her that everything she had said about real investors and sophisticated capital had been directed at the person who actually was her real investor and sophisticated capital. Why? She asked finally. I considered the question carefully. Initially because I believed in your vision and wanted to help. The anonymous structure was meant to prevent family dynamics from complicating business decisions. And now, I looked around the table at the family members who had spent years dismissing my actual success while celebrating what they thought was Sarah's superior business acumen. Now I think it's time for some honest conversations about business, success, and respect. The following weeks brought a complete transformation in family dynamics. Sarah's company didn't collapse. Instead, I restructured it with proper management oversight and realistic growth targets. But Sarah's role changed from CEO to a senior product manager position, with experienced executives brought in to handle operations and strategy. The family struggled to adjust to the new reality. Years of assumptions about success, intelligence, and business competence had been completely overturned. The computer kid, who they thought was barely scraping by, was actually a multimillionaire who had been secretly funding their golden child startup. Sarah took the transition hard. Everything she had believed about her business success had been built on capital provided by the brother she had dismissed as incapable of understanding real business. The sophisticated investors she had bragged about were actually representatives of someone she had consistently belittled. But something interesting happened over time. Once Sarah stopped trying to prove her superiority and started actually learning from experienced mentors, she began to excel. The skills she had developed at Harvard, combined with humility and proper guidance, made her genuinely effective in her new role. The company, meanwhile, became profitable within 6 months. With realistic expectations and proper capital allocation, the business model that Sarah had envisioned actually worked. The problem had never been her vision. It had been her execution and her unwillingness to acknowledge what she didn't know. As for me, I finally started being honest about my own success. The family learned about the consultancy, the software licenses, the investment portfolio, and the various business ventures I had been quietly building for years. The recognition felt good, but it wasn't the main point. The main point was that success comes in many forms. Sarah's MBA and networking skills were valuable, but they weren't more valuable than technical expertise and patient capital allocation. Harvard connections matter, but they don't matter more than actually solving problems for clients who pay premium prices for results. Most importantly, I learned that family respect can't be bought with anonymous investments or quiet success. Sometimes you have to be willing to speak up, even if it means disrupting comfortable assumptions about who understands real business and who's just plain pretend entrepreneur. Sarah never again questioned whether my online thing was real business. And I never again let anyone in the family assume that their achievements automatically made them more qualified to judge other people's paths to success. The pretending was over for both of us,